From Ivory Coast, Côte d'Ivoire. He is our most successful missionary there in Côte d'Ivoire. He has a knack of penetrating people and reaching out the very depth of the masses. And he is the one who has brought about great conversions. Hundreds of thousands so far. Huh? Ask him.
By the grace of Allah.
By the grace of Allah. But so far, he has not succeeded in his own country, Mali. He should do something about it.
He's requesting Huzur's prayers for that also, inshallah.
He must get back all the lost grounds and many more grounds to take the revenge on people who came and went back.
Ahmediyya.
And Allah has given him mind to plan and resolution to work. And trust in Allah. Inshallah, all these qualities will bring about a revolution in Mali as well.
So the question is that according to the verse in the Holy Quran, وَإِن مِّن أُمَّةٍ إِلَّا خَلَا فِيهَا نَذِيرٌ, who were the prophets of Black Africa and why are they less known to people?
I have studied the literature on this and I discovered that those old prophets left a heritage for the people which unfortunately was converted into witch doctorism and magic, etc. But when you penetrate deep into the older prophet's life in Africa, I'm leaving Islam out, talking of Africa before Islam. The scholars have discovered that all African tribes believed in one God. And from that, the concept of angels was born. Naturally so. And those people who were actually godly people, later on they were converted into heroes. And they were attributed the same property, same qualities or attributes as were attributed to angels and other godly figures. So researchers have gone into it and have found out that with the passage of time, the image of God or the images of God which they held to be correct, to be true, were gradually receded into background and were almost obliterated. Now, I have read some books on this, and if he wants, he can find out from their librarians and he can make the study himself. And from that I draw his attention to the fact that from that study he should write small essays and articles in review so that this evidence is recorded. I can't recall all the books which I have read in the past, and that is why it becomes very difficult sometimes for me to find a reference to what I have read somewhere. But he can start anew, and I hope inshallah he, along with some scholars in Africa, he can prepare some Ahmadi intelligent, knowledgeable youth to pursue this topic. This is very important, and the research cell should start working in Africa on not on every country, but on every tribe. The research should begin with rehabilitating the map of Africa before it was colonized. You should realize that for our research work, regional and country-wise references will not work. There were some people who were spread across many so-called geographical barriers which you find today. But in the olden times, they occupied the whole area as their own. They were the masters of the land. So what the British did, together with the European communities which gathered at Belgium to decide the issue of how the territories will be carved out, they, I think in 1922, they came to a definite decision as to how they should be carved out and how European countries should not interfere with each other. So a new map of Africa is drawn, which is not the real map of Africa of old. So the research workers, if they want to find out the reference to the olden gods, I mean gods, because to get presently you'll only find mention of not a god but gods. The research team has to find out that ultimately all these gods are in fact one god and they merge into one single god. It's a lot of work to be done. The study which I made lacked in many things. It was in fact addressed against Christians and Christian colonization. It left out many facts. So the idea was born even then that I hope that someday some Ahmadi workers will begin their research into this topic. So now you have raised it up. I ask you to start. Create a cell of intelligent workers in Côte d'Ivoire, and they should start studying all of Africa, not only Côte d'Ivoire, and all the Africa from the pre-colonial age. Draw new maps. Tell us that Africa as it existed at the time of colonialism, it was this Africa. Africa as it existed before Islam came, was this Africa. And from then on, from pre-Islamic era, you should begin your research of what they believed in and how they practiced their faith, etc. I am really obliged to him that he reminded me of this very important task, to prove the truth of the Holy Quran, and every little verse of the Quran, whichever way it points, is always right. To prove this is the responsibility of Ahmadiyya Jamaat today. And as such, there will have to be a very large team of researchers. It's not the task of a small team of one country. I would prefer them to get together here. All the African missionaries which are still here, he should remember to bring them together along with his missionary and tell him that the system should be devised whereby all Africa unites in this research. You see, the important thing is that the history of Africa should not be studied only with reference to the history of Africa as made or carved here in the West. They have their own specific interest. Their history, as they know it, may be different from the history written by some Muslim scholars of the time. When they came, they must have left a large heritage for us, which covers the history of different parts of Africa. When you come to the Moors and the conquest of Spain, the history as written by the periods may still be preserved partly in Spain or in other Arab countries, but that has to be studied. So the field extends and transcends African borders and runs into Arabia as well. So also the pre-Islamic history should be referred to wherever it is found. It will have to be collected. You see, it's not easy to recall all the history of the pre-Islamic world, particularly about Africa, particularly regarding Eastern regions. But some Muslim tourists who came to Africa, they might have collected some material which became sort of irrelevant to the students later on. We thought it's just one reflection. But for our purpose, it's very important. What pagan Africa they found when they came? What were the gods, if any? What were the practices? And so on and so forth. So all this material has to be studied, and it's a matter of many years' work, concerted work which is carried out in all African countries, but it's collected. The outcome is collected somewhere, and it is studied from the point of view of collating the material. So inshallah, if they do it here now, I would love them to send whatever they researched into, or whatever conclusions they drew, from time to time to me. So I'll be able to cast a glance, like a flying glance over the territories. So inshallah, I'll be able to help them build the future research program.
Inshallah.
Another very important thing which is related to this issue is archaeology of Africa. We must find some archaeological finds to help us draw the image of the olden days, the ancient times. We should remember one thing, that Africa has to be the oldest continent which gave birth to civilization. And this is what the African scholars themselves completely forget. The fact is that the first man that was ever born, or the first woman, which is Homo sapien, which was ever born, was born in Africa. And from then, according to the Holy Quran, humankind spread to all the countries of the world. It is impossible for us not to discover there the language, the olden language which was first granted to man to have its traces left in Africa. Relationship of African languages with Arabic. The older you go to the languages, closer should be the relationship. This is not to be confused with the influence of Arabic during post-Islamic period. The influence of Arabic in post-Islamic period is found in northern Africa mostly, but it started penetrating southwards. But I am talking of the Congo. Congo is not the country which received any Arab influence. So he happens to belong to that country. I mean, that area where he belongs. But both these together are French-speaking people. And their areas, his area is influenced by Islam, but his area is not. So a research work can be done in Congo as well. What are the old Congolese languages? I'm not talking of Congo after Belgium. Forget about that. Let's go far back into the Congo and study what archaeological finds are still available and traceable, and to what conclusion do they lead. So it's very important that this subject should be related with archaeology. One thing which will be surprising would be that in all the countries of the world you find some temples, some areas of worship, places of worship. But in pre-Islamic Africa you don't find any temples to have been built there which are handed down to us. The mosques began to be built with the building of the house of God at Mecca. So previously it's apparent that there were no temples built in the pre-Islamic civilization of Africa. And temples generally indicate idolatry. So the lack is good. The lack would lead to the same conclusion which I am drawing, that pre-Islamic Africa must have been Unitarian Africa. And what sort of worship they did has to be studied from their old pictures and images in the caves. Because as man emerged as Homo sapien, he began his life in caves. So the archaeology of caves is the one which I draw their attention to. It must be studied anew by Ahmadi scholars, and if there are any scholars in the universities, there wouldn't be many, they should take up archaeology, and with this purpose which I am telling, they should revisit the caves of Africa, oldest caves, and the drawings on the caves, and what sort of life they depict and so on and so forth. Similarly, many other areas will come to be discovered, of which I can't think now because I don't have the whole data before me. But I'm thinking on the lines on which they can develop their research work, and Africa will not lag behind other countries when I mention them in my speeches in Jalsa, that they have done this research and that research. I hope from next year, African research should also be mentioned in my speeches. This can be possible if you have a meeting of all the Africans. He himself won't be able to do it. You can. You have this video played before all the Africans who are here now. They should listen to it themselves and then start organizing them, and let me know if you can finally have one center to organize, to look after everything. Inshallah, from then on we'll be able to look forward to the future. So there is also an apology to be made. In this new book of mine, which is coming up on all these subjects, you will not find Africa mentioned. Why not? Except, incidentally that man may have been born there. Because there are two continents in the world which are traced back to be the oldest in human history. One is Australia and one is Africa. In Australia, a full study has been made of the scholars. They have traveled far and wide, and they have discovered that in Australia they believed in one God, while they originate from long time ago, but they can trace their history to 40,000 or more years. And for 40,000 years, they have not built any temples there. See? What I said is proved to be correct. No temples anywhere in Australia, because they all believed in one God. All the tribes of Australia, right from the beginning of time, have believed in one God while they spoke different languages, they belonged to different territories, they never communicated with each other. But their belief in unity was firm and unshakable. This has been discovered by the Western scholars who research into their life, etc., etc. But this was left unattended in Africa. In Africa, because they have been referring to it as dark continent, now they have traced back their own origin to this dark continent, but they refer to Africa as dark continent as an ignorant continent, and their history is not preserved. But one thing which is of common nature and which is very important is that if sociologists' view of the development of religion is correct, in Africa it can be proved to be wrong. In Australia, it can be definitely proved to be wrong. It can also be proved to be wrong in Africa by the absence of temples. And that is the point which I do your attention to. It must be studied why the history of Africa being the oldest, when the man began his sojourn on earth from Africa and took journey into the future from Africa. Man spread to all the continents. Why was not any archaeological proof of their religions prior to the known history of African religions? The scholar will tell you that they believe in this god and magic and this and that. And the magic is again the common factor binding Africa with Australia. There I can have proved that magic began to be understood as something which they could not understand. Some natural factors we simply could not understand. They used to refer to it as magic. But in Africa, how was magic born? And why did not religion develop like the sociologists want us to believe in Africa itself? So the very interesting offshoots of the research, which I'm interested in, but I can't find time to research. So I hope this team will be broadened into all these areas. Hundreds of Africans, if not thousands, and the youth from all the African countries who are educated, who are studying in colleges, universities, they should take it up. And from time to time refer to me all the research finds. The last thing which I want to remind you is that you are somehow forgetting that Egypt is Africa. Because of Arab influence and Islam's influence, Egypt is now considered to be a part of Arabia, which it is not. Egypt is Africa, and the history of prophethood in Egypt can be well traced, and it is well recorded. It is said that Moses was a black man. Many English scholars or European scholars who make films on Moses, they present him as a black man. Now, what was he? And did he belong to the black Africa or not? If he did, then his sign of the white hand becomes all the more pronounced and prominent. He put a black hand into his chest and it was shining white. So they are very interesting areas of study, and do not forget that in Africa most certainly we have recorded history of prophethood in Egypt. So your concept of there being no prophets in Africa is definitely wrong. But it should be proved more with reference to other countries of Africa. With that, I hope I have given you enough task, to follow and to pursue. And no time for your question, I'm sorry. We'll meet again, inshallah. And Allah bless you all. And I take leave of you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Wa alaikum salam.
This meeting with them has been very useful because of this.
Jazakumullah.
Okay? Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.